The U.S. trade gap hitting a 5-year high in January, and President Trump's top trade advisor saying this is a national security issue. But, Steve, take a look at 1984. This was in the midst of the Reagan Revolution. We had a historically high trade deficit, but that same year, look at how much we grew, 7.3%. We grew the highest we had in decades, and we haven't grown that high since, by the way, and that was during a high trade deficit year.
Yeah, trade deficits in and themselves, David, tell you nothing. Doesn't tell you about capital flows, doesn't tell you about intracompany transfers and the like. And for most of our history, going back to Jamestown in 1607, we've had a merchandise trade deficit. The key thing, capital comes in, put to work. One quick example, BMW plant in South Carolina, Germany putting in billions of dollars, has created tens of thousands of jobs directly and indirectly. They're producing 300,000 cars, including 200,000 cars for export.
Wow, deal with that, Bill. Bill, I got to ask, though, is the Trump administration wrong in worrying so much about a trade deficit?
Well, I don't like trade deficits because I think they're a symptom of a disease, and that disease is Americans living high off of money borrowed from foreigners, such as China.
I see John shaking his head no, as he usually does. Go ahead, John.
Trade deficits are a myth. I run a trade surplus with my employers. My deficits are my rewards that I run with clothiers, restaurants, car makers, you name it. We have a, quote, deficit because the U.S. is a magnet for global investment such that we export shares that don't account in what is always balances, trade balances always. What a ridiculous thing to say.
And Bruce, as I pointed out earlier, we had a huge trade deficit in '84. We also had the biggest growth spurt we've ever had.
Well, I'm not really so much sure about whether the deficits matter. What worries me more is that when Donald says these nasty things about Mexico and he's going to start a potential trade war, I mean, he says he wants to do more individual deals, but the only individual deal we know he's made is maybe with Russia.
Okay,
so
I think, by the way, Mexico needs us much more than we need them, Emax. So I don't think they're going to start nobody's going to start a trade war from their perspective. But Peter Navarro, who's the trade rep for President Trump, says that the trade deficit is a threat to national security, to which you say?
I agree with John Tamny. I don't think trade deficits matter. I don't think it's right that 100 other countries slap our goods with taxes. I understand that. I'm interested in what Reagan did with Japan. He put quotas on cars coming in from Japan. What about quotas instead of taxes?
Well, Sabrina, where does this end up? Clearly, it does bother President Trump and his advisors that we got this big trade deficit. How is that going to affect policy?
Well, first of all, I think it's silly to think about this as if it's in a vacuum. You know, Americans benefit tremendously from the fact that we have customers around the globe, and we also have products from around the globe. This makes things cheaper, and it makes things better for business here. And on top of that, I think the trade deficit notion is a little bit silly. We know that very few products are actually made only in one country. Parts come from America, parts come from China. So it gets a little hard to measure this. Of course, we want the administration to have Americans' best interest in mind. But trade is something that we should not be demonizing.
Last word from Sabrina coming up, Mark.